All right, sitting here today with Mr. Peter Prevot, the Executive Director for the Louisiana Association for Therapeutic Alternatives. There is a significant connection. Cannabis. Peter was integral to my own personal cannabis journey, and I think our intersection was a portal or a gateway for for the movement that is current day was transpiring today. So I want to talk about Mr. Prevo a little bit about your background. Can you tell us what you did in the past? You're also a partner owner of Bridge West Consulting, where you're not only, although you're based here in Louisiana, your knowledge base from license acquisition to regulations to advocacy to essentially every part of the chessboard in the cannabis industry for anyone that is looking for information and knowledge. With that CPA background, with the personal experience, the fact that purpose, cause, passion for what you're good at and what you love in life all fall within the same thing. And then the depth of knowledge you have surrounding that industry has been absolutely incredible, and you have a very unique perspective. So first of all, thank you for being here, and I want to dig a little bit into what makes that perspective unique. Talk to me about Bridge West.
Yeah, Bridge West, it's a CPA firm, and they started serving the industry in 2009, so cannabis only, right? So they don't work with any other industries, and it's kind of that niche, which for accounting firms is not uncommon. I mean, there are CPA firms out there that like just service McDonald's franchises or just serve, car dealerships, right? So it's in line with kind of industry trends. CPA firms are becoming more specialized, and so Bridge West, 2009, started out in Colorado, and it was a gentleman named Jim Marty, who's been an idol and mentor of mine, and I guess a partner now, which is kind of surreal for me. But so Jim was in Denver, ground zero, whenever the true commercial cannabis activity really was coming above ground. California had passed laws before that medically, but they were always semi-gray area. Like Colorado, Denver specifically, was one of the first places to issue medical permits, right? And so Jim, through his traditional CPA practice, just started getting a lot of interest from the cannabis industry in general.
What year would you say that was?
That was probably 2008.
Wow.
Somewhere around there. So he's a CPA, out in the area, and so he just starts getting a lot of his clients in traditional practice who were getting into this. And so, he looked into it, learned about 280E, and at that time, no one was really, the code hadn't been cracked yet, right? A lot of people weren't sure exactly how to file these tax returns and how to actually do that type of work. And so Jim traveled out to Oakland, California, the birthplace of legal cannabis, right? The first place to ever actually pass any sort of ordinance or anything. And so Jim goes out there to meet with a group of tax attorneys and other CPAs who were all trying to tackle this issue. And that was Hank Wykowski. He represented Harborside before the tax court. So, I mean, these were people that have been thought leaders in this for a long time. And that intrigued me as as a young CPA. I finished college, grad school in 2009 and passed the CPA exam all around the time this is happening. So I see this trend too.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm down here
Yeah.
and wasn't able to really get involved.
Have you worked at a firm that is not in such a restricted niche like cannabis?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I worked at right out of college. I worked at a Big Four accounting firm. So those are literally the largest accounting firms in the world. And so
Do they have names?
Yes, I was at Ernst & Young.
There you go.
Ernst & Young, and so that was my first gig out of college, and super trial by fire type experience because you're doing all sorts of different global clients, small clients. It's just really the gamut, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that was my experience originally out of college, but then I moved on and worked at a medical school for 5 years in the psychiatry department doing grant writing and working on clinic management. And granted, it's behavioral health, right, which is something that was always really, something I was passionate about that as well, and still am. I think
behavioral health, mental health.
Yeah, something that's definitely just always, cognizant of, and the dangers of it, and the fact of how hard the care is to access. So it was, at Tulane University, so doing that, grant writing, and like I said, some clinic management, and still kind of studying cannabis at the same time, like the laws specifically, and then the tax and the business side of it, and around 2012, 13, I actually started going to a lot of the national conferences, NCIA specifically. And so, I had found Bridge West as an NCIA sponsor, right, on the website before I ever even went to a meeting. And I noticed that Jim was going to be speaking and that he was also going to be speaking at a conference in Nevada later that same month. And so I went to both events and I'm like front and center, asking all sorts of questions. And, around that same time, I was able to pick up kind of my first cannabis client as a sole practitioner, and this was an edibles company based in California. And they were just coming online trying to figure it out, and just like everyone was at that time.
To put this in perspective, right, filing a tax return, what makes that so complicated about filing one in the cannabis industry at that time?
Particularly IRS code section 280E, right, which you're going to hear that word over and over again. But at that time,
well, exactly.
The law had existed since the early 80s. It was never intended to apply to cannabis. So the first question was like, okay, well, does this even apply, right? And if it does apply, then the law is pretty clear on that you can deduct the cost of goods sold and not much else, right? Actually, nothing else, right? So then, especially in like a manufacturing context, right, it becomes super important that you're getting that cost of goods sold right and that you're, getting your product cost as low as possible. And just the cost accounting side of it becomes really important, right? And so it was, the unknown, right? The businesses, especially like CPAs at that time and lawyers, were trying to figure out how to do this and do it right and do it in conjunction with the IRS,
So let's talk about a small business trying to get into the cannabis industry right now. How is having that knowledge and how your bottom line will be affected by certain verticals within the cannabis industry, whether it's plant touching, non-plant touching, and when you talk about 280E, there are obviously different paths to navigate and how to navigate it. And how important is that as a small business owner trying to get into this industry right now to know that information?
Well, I think just like entering, if you're going to enter any business, right, you need to know the ins and outs of the industry you're getting involved in. And, in this particular industry, at least for the foreseeable future, there's just a lot of additional work that you have to do. Like it's not just plug and play, as far as how you would run any other business. And so there are some additional considerations that need to be met, right? Now, the best practices, so to speak, are becoming much more widely available now that the industry's been going on for so long.
They weren't so much in 2008, 2009.
Right, exactly. And look, and I came in around 2012. That's when I picked up that first client. That's when I met Jim. And I was still just sole practitioner. I had my day job, but this was kind of my entry point into like, okay, I'm going to try to get into this industry, right? Which is a super common thing to hear people say today, but at that time everyone thought I was crazy,
So you're 2012, 2014, there's now a clear intersection between purpose, cause, passion, right? The passion piece, what is it drove you to the cannabis industry with the cannabis lens? Was it just the business opportunity? Is there something?
It was definitely twofold, right? Like, I mean, it was, I mentioned behavioral health, and it's something I had personally dealt with, a lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome after my brother passed away, and that was in 2009, right when I graduated college, and it was, he was 20 years old, died in a single car accident. And there were some factors at play. He had dealt with some addiction and things himself, and so it was a really traumatic experience for me. But then there was an underlying theme that had marijuana been available to him at that time, even though I think that he thought he was using it recreationally. I think that there was a lot more to it than that, especially with some of the addiction he had struggled with.
Yeah.
And I do know for a fact that the night that he got into the accident, he was seeking cannabis and wasn't able to get it.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, there was some
other alternatives to soothe the pain.
To soothe the pain, exactly.
Yes.
Gary. I know that's just something that I was dealing with at that time, and then dealing with my own, anxiety and PTSD as a result of that incident. Cannabis came on my radar, as something, that I should be exploring, and then particularly working through the university at that time and seeing the behavioral health, the state of that industry, right? And because it's right, even at a school, it's still an industry, and seeing the state of that and just not really wanting to go the pharmaceutical route,
Did you believe at that time that cannabis was a medicine, or was it just recreational in your eyes? Did you have that lens yet?
No, I did at that time have that lens, and you gotta, at this point, medical cannabis was, alive and becoming a thriving industry. I think you're at like 12 states at that
Okay.
time, and so it wasn't like, in my mind, it didn't seem super fringe,
Yeah.
especially as, had been following the industry and trying to find a way to
Yeah.
get involved. Now, I definitely, believed in the medicinal aspects of it, but now, came to it to that conclusion after I was a patient in several states, right, before Louisiana even had a program. I was a patient in California, I was a patient in Colorado. Both to learn too, right? It wasn't all just it was definitely a learning aspect involved with those experiences, learning how to become a patient.
Well, that's
And
that's a conversation in itself, because even as we sit today in 2022, there are 13 states. Correct me if I'm wrong, that are still not online. 12 to 13 states. So, if you're somebody in my shoes, and in 2016, 17, when this wasn't even a conversation, I was that person, right? Trying to find that and get that license in another state. And it was life changing for me, right? When I actually went into the West Coast, I went to California. It was recreational access, but what it was freedom to access uh, to information and to quality products. And having that access and being there and being able to use it to gain access to it through a license, or through recreational, but to use it even in that situation as a performance enhancer, and then get back on the plane and come back to a state where it is not legal. Man, it's a game changer. It is a game changer, right? And the fact, and so this is it's a conversation I think to be had at another time, but there are patients that really need to know how to gain access in other states. So I would say, for a patient, look for that neighboring state. Louisiana is a very harbor-friendly state where you don't have to have a Louisiana license to come in and access this program. And we talk to those patients every day. We talk to those patients in Texas
That's right.
uh, who do have a legal program, but there are so many restrictions and so many limitations and so few suppliers for 26 million population, right? It's laughable. But
Right.
for those who are in need, a 6-12 hour drive is a vacation. If I can come into a bordering state, get access through a licensed physician, and gain access to quality products that hopefully become more available here or in a neighboring state. So that whole licensing in another state is just it's a conversation in itself, but it's a great perspective to have. So
yeah, and look, and you asked me, one of the questions you asked me during that intro was, the medical benefits, and for me, it was pretty cut and dry. Like, I knew whenever I had access to medical grade marijuana, I didn't have nightmares and I could sleep. I
Yeah.
knew that, right?
that's
It eliminated the dreams, and you know, it was again a very cut and dry moment for me, and that had a lot of value, especially going through traumatic experience. So.
that's a conversation we have here on a regular basis, because this is what I see, and this is, I think, the market trends that you will see over time, is that as these states that come online and have easier access, and you have more patients that come through and have those positive experiences, um, the the efficacy of the plant, people are going to start to see the trends that people have been those, even those who can access for a recreational standpoint, states where it is legal, are accessing it for medical needs, right? I want to sleep better. I want to be able to integrate socially. I want to reduce some pain. I want to be able to relax and be in the present and create. I want to, when I get triggered, I want to be able to settle down and control my anxiety, right? But in some of these states where you do have a full thriving recreational market, it makes sense to go there because of quality, the variety, and the
Yeah.
cost, right?
That's
and
right.
and so absolutely, and the convenience. I don't want to go in and
And consistency too is a big part of that. Having consistent products that are reliably there. Yeah.
no, yeah, it's huge,
Yeah.
right? Patient experience, especially if you can go in, and that's conversation we'll get deeper into. But for somebody who, I was in a situation literally where I was using cannabis to manage my mental health and manage that stress response, essentially on a minute to minute basis.
Mhm.
When I go into a dispensary, if I can go in and look at a box or a package or something, and it shows exactly what is in the product and knowing exactly what I need, I don't want to talk to anybody. right? I'm in a better position now, so I will have conversations with you. But there are a lot of people who are not, and they're going in there and they're just they're not guided in the process, and that's a story for itself, and we'll get into it. But while we're here, I want to talk about Louisiana's program a little bit. Being the executive director for the Louisiana Association for Therapeutic Alternatives, one thing I didn't share in the beginning is this gentleman, Peter Prevot. He was one of, I would say, the first individual, but he's one of three very significant individuals that are responsible for getting Louisiana's program legalized and off the ground. And one of the intersection in his process, I think it was 3 years into your journey, three and a half years into your journey, our paths crossed, which is a story in itself. But even today, being the executive director that oversees all the dispensaries within Louisiana, who does collaboration and coordination between some of the choke points and the cultivation facilities, and just being one that has their hand on the chessboard and the pulse, that really helps Louisiana's program evolve and get to where it needs to be. In my opinion, you and your team control that chessboard incredibly well, and it's been very impressive to be able to see some of the work that nobody else sees behind the scenes, because this was not hard. You're in southern Louisiana trying to grow and sell weed legally.
2014, that was the first piece of legislation that really got filed here in the modern era, right? So, medical marijuana in Louisiana was actually legalized in 1978. And so, but they never did anything with it, right? It just got legalized and no regulatory authority got established. And so it just literally, this law kind of sat on the books for years and years and years. And so in 2014, really, the bill wasn't even to legalize medical marijuana. It was just to establish that regulatory authority, right? And
Yeah.
That year, the bill got filed by a senator out of Brobridge, Fred Mills, and I believe
Senator Mills.
Yes, Senator Mills. So I believe that bill got 2 votes, and one of them was Senator Mills himself.
And what was your involvement in this process?
I mean, at that point, honestly, I did, research, because I was already following laws in other states very closely, because at that point my relationship with Bridge West had really solidified, right? By 2014, I was no longer, completely outside the organization. I was more of a subcontractor. I was in their preferred network.
Sure.
And so I was working with Jim, quite a lot. And not only that, we had become friends. And so, whenever things were starting to move here, the people who were, it was a movement, right? It wasn't just 3 people. It was groups and groups of people. But I think that within that, traction started to happen, within that. And so I was approached literally, to help do research and to help folks who were already working on this kind of educate themselves, to learn more about the industry. And, primarily, the things that were important early on were just literally comparing the rules, licensing structures, and regs from other states to see what could be done here.
How optimistic early on were you that we could get a program off the ground?
Oh, I mean, look, after 2014, and again, I wasn't super involved in the legislative components at that time, literally, and I was pretty surprised that it turned around as quick as it did. I thought it was going to take an extra year or 2. To be honest with you.
Sure.
And so to come back in 15 and actually, get something on the books, and look, and it was never viewed as perfect. Like, everyone knew that at that time. It was like, there was a way to get access and to actually start the process here, and not just continue putting it off and not wait. And so a lot of concessions, and a lot of, different ideas got tossed around, and ultimately, big obstacles, included kind of the law enforcement community and DAs, and they have to be comfortable with the policies that we're going to bring here, and I can totally appreciate that in that perspective. And so, there had to be a negotiation that had to happen in order to make this work, and part of that included the university involved.
So let's stop right there, because this is a conversation that is still very significant in the states that we're working on from an advocacy standpoint, and it's still significant here in Louisiana, right? Those who wake up and put a bulletproof vest on, or put a firefighting uniform on and the gear, not to get burned, because there is absolutely a chance that they are going to have to stand in the way of life and death and do their job that day. And they wake up with that and they go to bed with that. But when it comes to treat the life and the physical disabilities and the physical ailments and the mental health issues that come with it, this is still not an option for them. And so that this absolutely needs to be a conversation. And this is a significant obstacle in other states that we encounter. Talk to me about the Sheriff's Association. Talk to me about law enforcement as an obstacle and the irony, because especially from my perspective, knowing how much the integration of cannabis can give these men and women what they are desiring.
Well, first I'd say on the medical side, I mean, there's been a complete evolution there, right? You know, I think in the early, again, you have to realize in 2015, no other state in the region had done this. You know, so I do believe that early law in Louisiana, and like I said, it was exciting that it passed in 2015, but it really wasn't workable until 2016 because one word had to be changed, and you guys will appreciate this.
Oh yeah,
prescription to
That's
recommendation.
That's right.
You know, and so nothing.
Why is that such a big deal that it's one word?
Well, because you can't prescribe a Schedule 1. You can't do it. You know, there's no legal way to do it.
Was there some sort of precedent that was set?
Yeah. Yeah. No, there was. You know, every other state had used the word recommendation. Look, after learning more about the legislative process, to say it's kind of like the joke always get made, and it's like making hot dogs or sausage. You don't always want to see how it's made.
Sure.
And, I'm still not sure, why or how,
Yeah.
There's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people giving feedback and, staff's working.
A lot of money getting
and
exchanged.
the staff's getting different versions and trying to, write something. So I still don't necessarily know why that was the way it was, but, it had to be changed.
Right.
But I think the work that we did here in 2015, right, it started the chain reaction in the region. You know what I mean? And, Arkansas, I do believe, whenever they were going to work on their thing, the fact that we had already done it, it helped them, right? It helped Florida's program evolve from a CBD-only program to a true medical program, right? And they added flower not long after that, right? So I think that the work here that happened early on really did help set a trend within the region.
So let me talk to you about that early on, the obstacles and the negotiation with the law enforcement community. Talk to me, bring me back ground level. What was the conversation in 2015 with the law enforcement community? What was that negotiation?
Well, they wanted it to be very tightly controlled,
How so?
traceable, by having a very limited number of suppliers.
What's their intent behind that? Why do they want a smaller amount of suppliers?
Their intent behind that, I believe, truly was coming from a place of not knowing how they were going to enforce this and just wanted to make sure that the chain of custody and the seed to sell tracking, and all these, safeguards and controls were put in place. I truly do believe that that's where it was coming from.
So it doesn't become like the Wild West of cannabis,
right? Which does exist. Let's not pretend it doesn't. I mean, let's if we can go read some news articles about Oklahoma, if we want to. And look,
that makes absolutely sense though. So there is a concern not for a state to turn into the Wild West, which is a valid concern. You just validated that, but at the same time, it just impresses upon the importance of the lawmaker to take control of their state right now, because the truth is that patients who need it, people who need it, have access to it, but there's no quality control process that oversees and ensures the safety of it. So whether you like it or not, it is producing real medical results. It is a much better option than alcohol or other recreational drugs or the pharmaceuticals that some of these people get addicted to, right?
And you have to realize that paradigm shift that's happened since 2015 versus today.
It's
right?
fast. It's fast.
It doesn't feel fast.
No, I'm sure you look at it every single day.
No, but actually, I mean, no. Like when you think about that, this is a generational change, and we're reversing something that went on for such a long time. Yeah, I guess it really is fast.
Right.
And the movement had started, much before that. But I think that's whenever you really started to see some wins, right?
No, but
I think Louisiana in 2015 for the industry at that time was a major victory.
Yeah, the negotiation, and this is why this is important, because when I went to California, and they had been doing this for 26 years at the time, and I went to the Veterans Cannabis Summit, and I came back here and it wasn't even a conversation yet, right? Nobody was talking about it. It wasn't even open. It wasn't open in my perspective. It wasn't open. And still, in the grand terms, it's still not very open. You're not going to have people talking about this out loud in a restaurant. Um, and so your perspective has progressed because that was 5 years ago for you, and this cannabis industry moves incredibly fast. But the truth is we go to South Carolina, we go to North Carolina, we're going to go to Tennessee, we're going to go to Texas. It's the same conversation. It is the same conversation. And so let me ask you, how much weight does the law enforcement and the sheriff's association carry in the decision-making process that govern these laws that are implemented or not implemented?
I mean, I think, look, anything that's going to involve criminal statute, public safety, highways, any conversation that's going to involve those types of matters, they're going to have a very strong voice. I mean, it's definitely, and I think you see that in South Carolina and North Carolina, and it's not by accident, right? And so I think it was great that at that time there was able to be a dialogue, right, and figure out a solution, to get this going and to get medicine in people's hands, which again, even though it took time to get there, it did.
So talk to me about the second year, right? Because the program had to evolve. You said in 15 it passed. It wasn't functional because of a word. That sucks for the patient community because somebody like myself whose life depends on progress, we wait another year because of a fucking word, right? That doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the pain of politics, and we saw the same thing happen in South Carolina. But it doesn't mean it hurts any less when that happens.
No, I
And so
completely agree.
we roll into 16 and talk to me about 16 and 17. The Sheriff's Association is still an obstacle, right?
No, at this point they have, basically removed themselves from any opposition to medical marijuana.
Were they for it, against it, neutral?
Just neutral, just silent, which is,
And what would you say when they wanted something and you wanted something? What was it that you gave to them, or your team, or this pro-cannabis side in that negotiation? What was it that made them satisfied to say, okay, we will allow this? In your words.
I think a few of the key things, the prescription monitoring program, right? Like utilizing that software, to actually track it in a way that where health providers and people that actually need the information have it. That was a big one. I think there was a sense of comfort in having the universities involved, right? And I think that was something that, I don't know exactly if that was their proposal or if there's a lot of stakeholders at the table, right? I mean, you really have to realize that. And there's more and more every year, and so there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions and approaches, and really it's up to the bill author to decide what to include and, which concepts they like or don't like, right? But I think it's from the law enforcement standpoint, those were things that I think made them comfortable with seeing it kind of used, through the pharmacy model and through the PMP, right, and just kind of having it, try to be more, which I thought was honestly, it was a unique thing. It was like it's one of the most medical programs,
I'm going to go ahead and say this right now. Louisiana's put themselves in a position to lead this country for the simple fact that the universities are involved, right, for the amount of cannabis research. Now, when I say research,
It's finally starting, right? It took time to get to that point, but they're finally,
But let's look at all things considered, right? You have universities involved. The research model, right? We're not going to take an FDA clinical trial. Maybe that is what would happen, but that is just not the right answer. If they can implement real research that produces real results, that we can move the needle in the real way that it needs to be. But you look at the geopolitical standpoint of New Orleans, Louisiana, economic export capacity, right? When we start talking about interstate trade and commerce and things like that, one of the programs that's going to dominate is south of the equator, right? And so when you're talking about port access and research and, every other country right now is in this conversation. And so universities involved, the suppliers that are needed, right? We just ended the night of monopoly with Mississippi being the only one that can supply research institutes. Now there's several others. So we are in a position to really do big things in this market if we handle it the right way. And I think
looking, there was some major, made some major steps. We're taking, we're taking this year, and like I said, I can try to go through the timeline, the anthology, and all that, but it feel like everything really became real in January, right? Whenever we finally had
When Flower came out.
Yeah, we finally had the whole plant medicine,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was obviously kind of one of the more watershed moments in this program.
So now we are 2022, and you're talking about this January.
Yeah, this January. That was the first.
That's right. Plant flower became available in Louisiana.
Right, and so that was obviously a huge step, and people finally started to utilize the program. Right.
Yeah.
Before that, it was a very, very small number of patients.
How many patients do we have now?
Right now, at least at the last numbers I saw, which were as of early August, it's just north of 50,000. I want to say 55, and that would be considered an active qualified patient. So that means they made a purchase within the past year. So within 1 year of August, they had made a purchase, and so that was just north of 55,000 people.
So that's like 1.2% of our population, right? Something.
And I have the number somewhere. It's a little under 1%. Right?
Okay.
It's a little under 1%, and
what's the state market typically when it's
3% is a benchmark.
Say again?
3%.
3.
It's a benchmark that gets looked at a lot. So I mean, Arkansas I know is at like 2.97. Florida's a little bit over 3. They're at 3.2. We were just under 1. But it is spread out, right? There are a couple of regions where, one region where it's over 2%, and then another where it's like 1.7, right? Then you see some like, where it's very low, like 0.8, even lower. So it is kind of spreading through the communities in different ways, right?
Sure.
And I think we'll see that accelerated with, the satellite locations and then the 10th permit that's going to get issued in the, in the coming, probably month or two, right? So, the word is starting to get out, right? And it took flower to make that happen. And now some capacity items that have historically held the program back are being, or have been addressed and are being addressed. One of those being the testing lab. So Orion Labs has received their permit from LDH. They're under construction right now. They're going to open up in Baton Rouge, projected early November.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, the LDAF lab doesn't go away. So that's the Agriculture and Forestry state-run lab. Doesn't go away. They're actually legally required to stay online until there's 2 labs that are operational for 6 months. But they've agreed to. Marijuana is only about 20% of what they do, right? LDAF tests all sorts of other stuff, and they test crawfish and crops and so it's a big lab, and they've added new equipment. 'Cause, their cannabis intake since January, their samples have gone up like 500%.
So for the folks at home, what's the significance of having more labs? What does that
Just
do?
more labs will get products to market much quicker. Right,
Yeah.
'Cause it is one of the things that causes delays right now, and it's major delays. I could actually pull some numbers, but it's almost shocking when you hear the amount of product that is,
getting discarded or not.
No, not getting discarded, but it's just sitting, right? Because, the suppliers have sent their samples, and it's sitting, waiting to be tested, and they can't sell it until it's been tested, right? And also,
they just don't have the capacity to test? Is that the choke point, or what is
it? Yes.
They don't have the equipment. They don't have the people. They don't have the.
I don't know exactly all the details. I think it's a combination of some of those things. Now they have bought new equipment, some new equipment. They're expanding, and so the good news though is that they're going to continue at that lab to accept marijuana samples no matter what. So however many labs we end up with, whether they license 2, 4, like they're going to continue to test through that lab as well. So it'll just be another option.
Is there a lab cap on how many we can have in the state, or
no? There's no cap.
But you'd mentioned a 10th pharmacy license. There's been 10 on the books for a while. Can you kind of give us an update on that?
Yeah, there was always 10, allowed by the original statute, the original law.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you just look by the fact that the program was really constantly in flux, for quite a while in the beginning. And so, now with the 2022 session and everything kind of being more settled, that 10th permit is actually the procurement window already came in August, I believe is when they did it. And so applications were turned in, and, they'll be conducting a series of interviews in early November. And, permit could get issued as soon as the November board meeting, but I expect it to fully be done by the end of the year, and that's going to go to the metropolitan region. So that's Orleans, Jefferson Parish, St. Bernard,
Nice.
Plaquemines.
Nice. That's just a community and a population that's being underserved right now. Louisiana in general is being underserved, but this area, with the amount of tourism, with the amount of people who come through this area, we have a significant choke point here in New
The
Orleans.
existing license holder is going to be opening up his new store. He said, I mean, as soon as November, he's going to be opening up a second location at the 5,000. I believe it's 5055. It's definitely the 5,000 block of Veterans
Oh, nice.
out in Metairie.
Nice.
So,
Great.
I mean, they're over there swinging hammers right now.
Bigger
Oh,
location.
Yeah, significantly bigger location.
Great.
And so, so that could be online as soon as November. You know, I know with construction and things now.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of expecting December, but he's moving on that one.
So
know.
talk to me total expansion in Louisiana, right? What does
So
it
the new
look like?
law, Act 491, which was passed in 2022, allows it allows for a total of up to 30 dispensaries, but they don't all come online at once. And so there's a there's an active patient count that has to be met in order for the satellite locations to be issued. And so where we're at today, 7 of the 9 regions met that criteria. The only 2 that didn't would have been the central Louisiana region, and then also the Monroe region as well. So those 2 were a little bit short. So as of right now, 7 are allowed to open their satellite locations, and that meant that they had at least 3,500 active qualified patients in the region.
Did all 7 opt to expand?
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
they're all, you know, working on getting the right locations, getting through zoning approvals, you know, dealing with setbacks on schools, churches, daycares like that. But
Is there opportunity for them to expand again? Is there another number? that
yeah.
they
So
can hit?
they'll do another patient count next August.
Okay.
And depending upon where the numbers come back, then how the new stores are performing, that could potentially unlock, you know, the second locations. But again, the total cap is 30. Now they're also required to do statewide delivery now, right? And so
Right.
that means that at least once a month you have to deliver to every zip code, you know,
Right.
offer delivery to every zip code within your region.
Now, let me ask you a question. What prevents them from putting 2 dispensaries or pharmacies close to each other? Do they have to go to a different city within their region?
Yeah,
or
that was the concept, right? Was to try and, you know, not end up with like a Green Mile, you know, in Denver where
Sure.
they're all clustered in one place, because one of the big arguments out there was rural access, right?
Yeah.
And trying to, you know, to ensure that those
I tell you what, I
communities-
wouldn't mind seeing that though. Right now in Louisiana, set up a little Green Mile and put people in competition with each other, right? Because the patient's gonna be the winner in that situation, right? If I can go and I have access between 4 to 7 to 9 on one street, who am I gonna pick? Then you're gonna see some real competition, and that's what I look forward to in Louisiana is when we get to the point when we have an expansion to that level where there is convenient access for the patient, you know, for a lot of reasons that we can go down. So let me ask you, just 12-month snapshot, August, September, October, where do you see Louisiana's program from where it is today?
I mean, I think everything is moving in a positive direction at the moment. Nurse practitioners should start offering recommendations. Is probably, they're saying, December on that. There's still some basically questions about how to get them the Schedule 1 privileges that they need in order to write the recommendations. So that'll come on. And so I think with that, we'll see, you know, again with the rural access, but then it'll also likely drive costs down to an extent on on getting enrolled. So by December, we'll see that. Again, I think the metro region has 1 new store opening very soon, and then another one coming online quickly next year. So getting to a total of 3 pretty quickly in our most populated region in the state. You know, so I think that's a big move. You know, by the end of, say, in the next first quarter of next year, you know, I think we're probably seeing 15 to 18 stores open statewide.
That's significant.
That's great.
That's double.
And then,
That's double than what we are right
double-
now.
double
That's
than what we
big.
have.
and
I
with
think
more
you should-
lab testing, less pinch point, more product
more lab
availability.
testing, products getting to market quicker, the supplier's ability to launch new products greatly increased.
Let's dig into that a little bit, right? Because we can have all the stores in the world, but the problem we're having in a lot of states, other states are having similar issues, is we do have dispensary stores. It's not vertical integration. It's separate than the supply chain. Here in Louisiana, we have 2 suppliers. One supplies flour, and then the other one, smaller supplier, essentially supplies everything non-flour.
To
an extent.
I'd say that the Good Day Farm is definitely putting out a lot. I mean, their edibles are definitely readily available now. I know for a while their edibles came out, and there was a time when they weren't available. and Ilera did step up to put out edibles, and they have devoted historically a lot of their production capacity with what they're growing to the meter dose inhaler devices and the edibles. And because they were at a time the primary supplier of those, they kind of are down a path right now where they kind of have to keep doing that because a lot of patients are relying on those two products. They've been very consistent for a long time, and so it would be irresponsible to change those right now. And so they are adding additional capacity for cultivation, and so it was actually released publicly at the last at a recent commission meeting, and so that's going to be in the metro region as well. Not sure the exact location, but that'll be a satellite grow facility, and Brandon, the head cultivator, he was actually we had a meeting in Shreveport recently, and he was talking about some of the new genetics they're bringing in, and he's really looking to kind of work on a craft flower line out of that facility. Yeah, which I think is
what they have a great facility. I mean, pretty incredible state of the art facility.
And then on the other side of the coin, Good Day, I mean, they're adding like another 40,000 square feet of cultivation
which gives
space
them total of what capacity?
I think somewhere around 80,000 square feet.
And what is their total capacity they're trying to reach? Because
I can't speak exactly that, but I know they have a very large building. It's over 200,000 square feet, and they're building it out in phases, right?
Yeah. And, is there a cap on the square footage, or can they go until it makes sense?
No, they can't. And they still have their Baton Rouge facility too. So that's just the Ruston facility, the big one that they've been building. And I've had a chance to tour it, and I will say, I mean, it was top notch.
It is top notch, and I'm going to speak from a patient perspective here, though. What square footage is needed to serve 3% of Louisiana's population effectively?
I can run that number for you, but I don't have it on the top of my head.
I bet you can get close. Are we talking?
Well, I'll tell you. Look, here's what I'd say. Right now, we're under 1%, and I know at times it doesn't seem like it, but there's a lot of product out there ready to be sold. Right? It's sitting there.
Well, we're under 1% for a reason, right? The same reason. It's because there's no products, right? Just like we're in a flower shortage right now, which is 51% of the market, but when a product shows up on the shelves, you're not going to see another batch release. And this is a choke point with LDAF with the testing, and this is a great example, but the patient is not going to be able to order that flower again. Louisiana are releasing great products, right? And so when I'm hearing things like they're going to be able to produce, 75 strains by the end of the year, I really hope in the model they focus. If they can produce 10 good strains and keep the shelves full, right, sooner rather than later, then Louisiana's market's going to explode. It's going to explode.
No,
right?
and I do, I think that's the direction it's trending in. But are we there yet? Absolutely not. Still a lot of work to be done. And I think, again, this Orion Labs in January is going to be a watershed moment for the industry, and I hope more labs come online. And again, that's the great thing about the labs, right? Is as I mentioned earlier, LDAF, cannabis is about 20% of what they do, so it's one of the few, verticals in the industry where you can accept, you're not really constrained to the point where you're like, oh, I'm doing this Schedule 1 activity, so that means I can't do anything else. Labs, you get the license. There's a lot of opportunity there. So, but I think that with the additional capacity, we're trending in that direction.
Yeah, no,
and
definitely.
Again, like you started, it kind of spoke to it earlier about the the vapes and the the meter dose inhalers and the gelatin chewables. I mean, all those things have been consistently available, right? And so it'll take us time to get there with flower. Again, and I know January seems like ages ago, but it really. Still working out the kinks.
It's quick, but then this is where the perspective I want to make sure it gets shared, because January seems like ages ago. Just think if you're an epilepsy patient who needs a strain 17 times a day, right? And needs to be able to reliably walk in, because not only himself but his daughter and his wife and his livelihood and his survival depend on access to good quality controlled medicine, right? So January is a fucking eternity, man. And I say that because that is the perspective we will always speak from, and I look, I will never walk softly there, because you and I absolutely agree that it can't happen fast enough.
No, completely.
But there's a lot of human element that gets in the way that prevents that from happening. And Southern politics are politics, and it's unlike
And
any
look,
other political organization or process in this country. And so the fact and the skill and the grace that you've been able to navigate this and the evolution of this program, the only thing I can say and will always say is let's hurry the fuck up, right? Because for someone, yeah, for someone who relies on this as an actual medicine, I don't care if I go into a recreational dispensary or if I go into a medical dispensary and need a medical card from a doctor, right? Because the truth is, most doctors I sit with, I'll talk circles around them when it comes to the efficacy of cannabis and how it affects me, from a medicinal standpoint. So yeah, I share that perspective with a sense of urgency, and that's always the perspective we will shift from.
No, and I appreciate it. I really do.
And I know you do too.
Yeah.
But and I also want to share, and this is why I have you here, and I think the perspectives in this conversation is because you see everything that happens behind the scenes. We don't. The audience don't.
Mm-hmm.
New users don't. Those looking from outside of our borders, seeing what's going on here. It's easy to sit back and judge, but I've been there personally and see some of the forces and battles that you and your team and those who are instrumental on a daily basis, and I'm like, I don't want to be here, buddy. I don't want to be here.
It is an interesting scenario, but changing something this major and the importance of it and all that, it's definitely it's worth it.
Yeah, it absolutely is, man. I commend you for what you do, and you're good. And I also want to impress upon the point that even though you were in a research group in the beginning, right? Your passion is research in this, right? When anyone in this state, and I've seen it firsthand, and I'm not going to say this, I don't want to put you in a bad position because there's a lot of good people involved in this process, but when anyone needs information about cannabis, the cannabis industry, or even the patient perspective, they go to Mr. Peter Prevot, right? And that information comes from him. That drives the decision-making process. And that's why I think over time, as you keep coming back and we sit and you share your perspective outside of Louisiana, which we'll dig into a little bit, people are going to see the incredible perspective that you have. So
no, and it's been, look, and I got to say, it's not what, it didn't happen the way you would think, right? I grew up in a very conservative area, right? So obviously it did get my attention whenever I'm noticing other places legalize marijuana, and it's not even a conversation where I live. So that'll get your attention, right? But accounting typically not viewed as the sexiest, most creative thing that people are super passionate about. And
we hold sanctions against country with capital, with cash, right? With revenue, with money, right?
But
it makes the world go round.
Serendipitous for me the way that it happened, that truly was an early opportunity and an early entry point. Like, in fact, one of the earliest.
Yeah.
Right. Like as soon as the industry became an industry, it was one of the first big things that had to get figured out. So that background just enabled me early to learn a lot and to really have the foundations and see how this thing was building and see how it was built over and over and over again. And having, we have clients in, over 30 states, at 600 plus at the moment. I'm in the consulting division, right? So I'm not I'm still with Bridge West, but I'm not in the CPA services. I mean, we have a very great team handling that, but I'm in the consulting division now because it does line up more with the work that I've been doing as far as government relations and policy and regulation. And I work a lot with license procurement. I work a lot with internal controls, and a host of other issues with different size businesses. But that perspective, right?
It's incredible. It's what drives.
It's just been very fortunate for me, and I've been able to learn this over a long period of time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not
because
it's not that I'm even that sharp. It's been hammered into my head at this point.
It's deep work,
Yeah.
right? There's so much depth in that perspective, and that's what makes it valuable. So, here's a great conversation for anyone that's tuning in that transcends borders. Medical versus recreational. Talk to me. What is it that truly makes that difference? In your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to think about it, from the policy and business and kind of regulatory perspective. Again, that's just how my brain is trained.
Yeah.
Right. And so, what those two things mean really differ a lot from state to state, right? I mean, they really do. And, a well built medical program, or one that truly was about medicine, will likely long term, still be relevant post recreational. But ones that maybe weren't planned the right way, it seems like everybody just kind of transitions over, and the medical gets pushed aside for a few years.
Can you give a good example of a sustainable medical program that has survived a recreational transition?
No, because I don't think the market's there yet.
No, I mean,
Can you maybe envision one? Can you?
Yeah,
can,
I think Michigan would potentially be one where it's like recreational happened there pretty recently, right? And so the medical is starting to come back.
What
right?
would need to be there for it to be sustainable? Like what are the building blocks? I know you see it.
Yeah, I mean, truly, I think it does need to be, the physicians need to really take a really hands-on approach, and then the supply, as you referenced, like there needs to be that stable supply that's built pharmaceutical grade.
Right, but you also have to look at the convenience store model, right? There's a reason why people shop at convenience stores or stop at convenience stores, and it's always going to be a huge revenue driver. Convenience, what is it that drives that patient journey? What is it that drives their experience? So if I can get a medical card and it offers me patient protections from employment protections for my job, if I can go in and stand and get front of the line access, if I can go in and not have to pay taxes, if I don't have to have purchasing limits, right? So that is what in itself is going to make that medical trend come back. Reinforce that with it's already being picked up and covered by Workman's Comp, who have done the research and proved that it is a more cost-effective model to cover medical cannabis with Workman's Comp than it is to prescribe opioids and the other pharmaceuticals. And so this is why the trend will shift over time. But you're asking, do we see that now? No, because the demand hasn't shifted. The understanding of the consumer market hasn't shifted, and then the laws that enforce and protect the things we just spoke of are not in existence yet. So
Peter, you had said something about medical strain, and I think Gary, you could touch on this too. What's the difference between a medical and a recreational strain?
The quality control process, right? No, it's the recreational strain. It's the answer is nothing. Cannabis is cannabis, right?
I would argue there may be differences in the volume of production, right? Like whenever you see a transition over to rec, you do see larger and larger scale production kind of become the.
But does that change the content of the product?
Does that lessen the quality?
I think in general, yes. In general, small craft cultivation in general is usually going to have more minor cannabinoids, more terpenes.
Yes, it's going to be more diversity and a better product.
Why is that?
But also think that, as from an agricultural standpoint, that we're getting there very quickly.
Yeah.
Right. You got to think that some of these facilities are getting so large that that is kind of uncharted territory to have that much canopy.
Is it because they're pushing too much scale at one time and they don't have the attention to the detail? Is that
right? I mean, you can't. I mean,
yeah. It's revenue driven versus patient outcome driven. Would you agree with that?
It's also driven by regulatory environment and just with permit limits. How much canopy you were allowed to grow. I mean, there's a lot of things I think could go into it. But again, I think that those bigger operations are starting to get there, right? But just the difference whenever you talked about medical versus rec and the grows, I do think you see them scale very quickly whenever rec hits, right? And it does take, usually if you were a small facility and you go to a really large facility, there's going to be a learning curve and a period of time for you to get your quality back up to that level. And I think my general comment would be, in general, the medical products tend to be better than the rec products.
But
the rec product, the rec markets to me it's a lot of the experience factor.
No, I get it, but at the same time, let's just look at a basic model in the rec market versus the niche market, the craft grower. Let's talk about the craft grower from the medical perspective. What if I was growing a plant specifically for an epilepsy community, right? There's going to be a depth of knowledge in that process down to how do I control terpenes, terpene sequence, terpene volume, terpene the total terpene profile, what specific minor cannabinoids need to be into it. what types of epilepsy, what types of plants, how does that diversity change down to the phytochemical level? If I was a craft grower growing with that intersection of purpose, cause, passion, then you can truly target that community, right? And that's the difference between your craft versus those who are going to grow in quantity. Who is their market, right? It's just a wide span of people who are going to have a quality experience with this product, but it's not in-depth focused on a specific need, right? If I want to start seeing some nine-finger flower, right, for what I need for my medicinal purposes, then there's going to be a very particular and driven and path to get there within what 10 to 12% tolerance on that experience each time, because at the end of the day it still is a weed. But we have the ability to do that. You know, the ones who are controlling the market space in these emerging markets are who, right? Who is it that's controlling the initial market space that is really influencing the cannabis community in some of these new states? Generally the MSOs, right? Yeah, not well. We're not Louisiana, right? Outside of Louisiana, but
I mean, definitely on the East Coast for sure, right? And
yeah,
definitely on the East Coast. That's Florida, New York, New Jersey, right? Huge MSO presence there.
North Carolina,
and
South Carolina. There's still a huge conflict, even though they don't have even though they haven't issued the license yet. You see who the players are in the game behind the scenes, right? And because why is it difficult to get a license in these emerging states? Can you shed some perspective on that? For a company coming in, why would it be difficult for me to get a license in a new state? What are some of the challenges?
Well, I mean, I think so. If you want to go back to like the South Carolina example, 'cause I think that was one that you were watching closely. But I mean, how many were they looking at? I think it was a handful, right?
North Carolina, I think was I think 10 license holders. But the regulations are so strict that it only allows certain players to play the game.
Yeah, and the capital requirements, right?
That's a big one.
The capital requirements are what's probably going to be most companies' obstacles into competing at that level, right?
Yeah.
With such a small number of cultivators, it would be, and construction costs are only getting worse.
Yeah.
So, yeah, look, it's a highly regulated industry, and I think there is this gold rush mentality out there, and a lot of people want into the market and don't actually, and I guess as someone that does some licensing work here and there, I do hear a lot of stories, and one that's been kind of resonating with me lately is this gentleman running grocery stores in the East Coast and talking to him about permits. And I'm like, well, what's your connection to the business, or why do you want to do this, etc. He's just like, oh well, he's like, tired of working so much. I just kind of
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, get ready to work 14-hour days and nights and weekends if you want to try to take a startup through this blender of an industry that exists.
It's a blender.
And so it's just kind of an interesting perspective where clients that have been around for a long time with this on the West Coast right now are literally, a lot of them are hanging it up. They're out. It's over. Permits for sale, not even really valuable, worth anything.
Yeah.
And then, on the other side of the country, everyone's fighting over them.
Yes.
Right. And it's just kind of interesting because, it's that kind of disconnect that's happening right now. Where as a country,
when does
as a country, we're overproducing marijuana, and we have been for quite a while. Right. But then here in Louisiana and in some states, the legal market, is still dealing with testing issues and things like that prevent products from getting to market.
So
right?
Talk to me about what's happened with that overproduction right now.
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to say, but one of an interesting theory that I've kind of heard discussed a lot recently is the fact that, the industry was headed towards major price declines and overproduction already in 2000, as early as 2017 to 19. You're already seeing a lot of price compression and things like that happening. Well, COVID kind of reversed the trend for a moment, right? Like whenever COVID, the pandemic hit, there was a lot of factors, but some of the more commonly cited ones that I hear would be, okay, well, a lot of people were at home. They're dealing with a lot of extra anxiety, stress. I think there was maybe stimulus money could have been a factor too. But either way, the industry was declared an essential business, for both recreational and medical purposes, which was amazing. And the usage numbers in most states shot up. I mean, in some cases, 20, 30% sales increases during COVID.
And look at the mental health spike too, as well.
Right.
And then look at
And so
top
during that
qualifying
time,
conditions.
the industry trend that was kind of going on already kind of got masked for a minute, right? And so what that led
Almost
to,
like a bubble.
What that led to was just a lot of extra capacity getting built, particularly on the West Coast, right? But really all over. I mean, you have to really sit back and think about it. Probably since the mid 90s, right? Probably since the mid 90s through today, almost every day in America, more marijuana is being grown than it was being grown the day before.
Wow.
If you really think about that, and only now until recently you're starting to see some companies go offline. You're starting to see large black market enforcement in Oregon and in other states too, because now the state has money to start to deal with those things that have been going on. So, it's hard to know how much cannabis is truly being produced, but I think it's safe to say today that there is an oversupply nationally, right? But it's just interesting because it's not necessarily always in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, but here's the truth, too, is that the regulator and will always be the underlying regulator of the legal market is the black market. So an oversupply in the United States is people, and I guarantee you, everybody who listens to this is either know someone within arm's reach that has access to quality medicinal strains that are on the black market right now because of the oversupply issue, right? And from an affordability standpoint, and states where it is not legal yet, or they have limited markets like Texas or even in Louisiana where they're producing good quality, but they just don't, because of the choke points, we don't have the supply to meet the demand and then the cost with the new market. More people are getting bang for their buck, and they have trusted sources within the black market. And so this is a conversation that absolutely needs to be had, because right now in Louisiana and in other states, I'm buying a product that is telling me, if I'm lucky, the amount of THC and amount of CBD in it. There is nothing else that is driving that experience for me. So how is this different from the black market right now? I can get this other stuff cheaper. And I can tell you just from the use, through a trusted source, that this is a better product for me that lasts me longer periods of time, that I can get for a much cheaper price. So if there are business owners or the markets or those who make the decisions who are listening to this will always be a competitor, right? You look at the financial situation, the mental health crisis that this country is, and then, the inflation rates and some of the economic situations people are in right now. I'm not going to go pay, $600 an ounce.
No, there's actually
for something.
The first time you're starting to see more research, right, on kind of the relationship between these two.
Well,
things.
here's the thing that happened with cannabis, because I don't think it comes down to research. I think it comes down to having credible channels that patients can share their voices and that can be heard by others. Because if you look at what happened with cannabis, is for a very brief and focused period of time, eyes were on the medical community, and we absolutely lost trust in that medical community. In cannabis at the same time, because we were out of work, we were focused on information flow. There was so much information that came online, not from new cannabis information, but for cannabis information that has been there for years, centuries, whatever, but now it's being interpreted in a way through the patient's eyes and the patient's perspective. And the truth is that the medical efficacy of this plant can't be denied, which is what is driving the demand, not only from a recreational standpoint, but also from a medicinal standpoint. So I just think that's an incredible point to make. Let's talk about, if you don't mind, patient protections, because this is something that is a big talking point in a lot of states, especially these states that are coming online. Even the states who are online already, I can't legally use because of drug testing policies, because of, right now they're being forced to utilize pharmaceuticals. What happens if you struggle with migraines, or you have back pain, or you need something more than an NSAID, and it's not legal in your state? And just like myself, you're a veteran who has come home, and you deserve the medical freedom to access a natural plant that helps you. Let's talk about patient protections for those people. How much is that driving the market? When are we going to see that in Louisiana? Because I know Louisiana's situation is reflecting a lot of others, and you're very knowledgeable about this. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely trending in a good direction. So at the moment, we had our first, we haven't had any patient protections here ever until August 1st, whenever
Yeah.
this new law kicked in.
Why is that? Is that something that just happens in the later stage of the legislative process, or is that?
Yeah, typically you're looking, especially, for our situation here, it wasn't a priority whenever you have major things
Right.
that needed to get done with the program,
Like fundamental things like
flower
yeah.
or inhalation period,
Sure.
right? Because you have to realize it wasn't that long ago where
You need a program before you have patients.
exactly
Yeah, to protect them, yeah.
and again to have the foresight to get everything right at once. That's getting easier because now you got so many different models to look at, right? There's so many different models to look at as far as model legislation and how states do it. There's a lot more examples to follow now. But so we had nothing on the books until recently, and the bill that got passed was a bit of a watered down version of I think the bill author's original intent.
Yeah.
But so state employees are now exempted for pre-employment screening, exempted for medical use. For those that have a recommendation, treated just like any other pharmaceutical, essentially. Now, if you show up to work under the influence or
On the
affects
job,
your
yeah.
job performance, you're going to have problems. Still allowed to enforce against you at that point, which I think is fair. And they also created a task force to study the issue here and to make more recommendations, which I think will lead to more legislation, right? And they set out, they had their second meeting. They broke into subcommittees. They've set like 6 priorities they have to look at. And I know, Gary, one that you've talked about a lot are specifically law enforcement firefighters. So that was one of the 6 priorities, was to kind of continue working through policy on that.
Yeah, and
I can tell you at a high level right now too, like the way that law was written, it was kind of vague in a way because it just said law enforcement, right? It said law enforcement. It mentioned first responders, etc., but it said law enforcement. And what is happening on a state level right now is the Department of Corrections is interpreting law enforcement to mean the entire Department of Corrections.
Wow, here comes the power of the word.
So the power of a word.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right? And so anyway,
that's a lot of admin staff.
So that's if you work the desk at at maybe say Angola State Penitentiary, right? You have a desk job over there. You're still considered, at least in their eyes, you're still considered DOC. They're interpreting law enforcement to bleed over into DOC. So this is a complicated section of law, is what I'm trying to get to, because employment law in and of itself is already pretty complicated, and then you throw a Schedule 1 on top of it. It's not an easy solution because the employers have a voice as well.
No, and you know what? You bring up a good point, though. It's not an easy solution, and this is why it requires strong leadership, and that's what we ask on for these decision makers. And I have this conversation personally. Be a leader, right? Because the truth is, if you look at the men and women who serve within these borders, the law enforcement professionals, those who put on a uniform to fight fires on a daily basis, there is a chance every single day when they kiss their families goodbye that they're going to have to stand in between life and death. And waking up and assuming that burden, that risk, carries challenges in life that they will inevitably encounter. And the fact that if we look at what's going on in Baton Rouge Fire Department right now, which is very passionate to me, is that here's a gentleman at the end of his career, has served 25 years honorably within this organization, has been subjected to a random drug test and outdated policies where they test for metabolites in the system. He has a legal recommendation from a licensed physician within the SOPs within the fire department that was sent to me from the union president. It says that you cannot use cannabis or marijuana unless legally prescribed by a licensed physician. He has been fired. His pension, his life, he and his wife, I spoke to both of them, their lives have been jeopardized because of the human element and the way these laws are being interpreted, or the lack of protections that we have for these men and women who are assuming the highest risk of anyone else in this country on a daily basis. And so if anyone's going to make a decision and need an argument for patient protections in this country, why don't we ask the men and women who give us the ability to live within peace and make those decisions, right? It's incredibly passionate to me. It's incredibly important, and it's incredibly It's important that you hear this perspective and others hear this perspective in those decision-making processes, because I know how close you are to it. What's going on in Baton Rouge right now is going on in essentially every other state. If it's not going on now, it will go on at some point. But what I can say to those who are listening, if it can happen to this gentleman, it can happen to anyone that puts on that uniform every single day. And if I were them, if I was the leadership in there, I would put the fucking boots on and come to work ready to fight every day until that shit gets overturned. And if you need my help in the process, don't hesitate to call, because that's what this organization was created for. Sorry, I'm gonna get off my rant, but patient protections is absolutely huge, and here's why. Now here's a gentleman that was using cannabis, and you're talking to someone who has not used any NSAIDs, ibuprofen, Tylenol in probably 6 years now. I've used cannabis for my pain management, right? A natural plant medicine. I'm to a point where when I find something that works for me, it gets shipped to a lab. I know exactly what's in it, and I know how it affects my body. I can wake up. I have a strain that works for my GI disorders. I have a strain that helps manage my anxiety and social integration and productivity during the day. And I have, strains that lights out in the evening when it's time to go to bed, right? And when those times present themselves. But someone in my condition, I was microdosing on a daily basis throughout the day, both progressively and reactive, just to manage that stress response. And one, not to kill myself, but two, to be functional, integrate back into a functional society. So let's talk about the phytoanalytic approach, because this is a situation and a challenge that is, as I'm seeing in a lot of states, not only Louisiana. Louisiana, we were able to access the THC and the CBD content. What are some other things that drive that patient experience? And I know you know more than anyone, Peter.
I don't know. I was looking at some of your notes earlier, and I think you've come a long way on that discussion.
We'll just have a terpene battle right now.
Just sprinkle terps on each other.
Yeah.
But so anyway, short answer today. That is the only information that we get. In November, that's supposed to be more available with the terpenes, minor cannabinoids, all the other components in there. I actually also saw recently on a Louisiana Department of Health presentation that they're making some updates in Metric, which Metric's the seed to sale tracking system. There are going to be some updates made in there that help the suppliers put the information in more in like a COA style format, because they're getting ready for the fact that we're about to get this new information. Right?
So the tech's ready to receive the info.
Exactly.
The labs need to perform on the data.
In the past is maybe something that would have been overlooked, and we would have been, after the lab would have came online, right, everyone would have been trying to figure out, oh no, how do we get this information in the right place? So it's good to see some of that type of foresight going into it. But so anyway, I saw this on a presentation recently. I know the new lab's going to test for that.
Does that slow the process down, or is it just another step in the process?
I don't think it significantly slows down the testing. I think they're using the same equipment and all those sorts of things, but it really does. It gives the patient, obviously a lot more information about what they're going to consume and how that might make them feel.
And let's talk about just two basic questions. What if the patient knew what exactly in that plant helped them? What if the patient or consumer knew when they walked into a retail outlet, dispensary, pharmacy, what if they knew the phytoanalytics within each plant, right? If they knew what helped them, and if they knew what was in the plants that were on the shelves, right? And so for someone that goes in, and this is not only Louisiana, right? I just did a dispensary tour in California. Has been doing this, almost longer than anyone. And by the 10th dispensary that I was in, I had a group of customers standing around me asking me questions because the packaging does not provide the information that's needed to make effective decisions, right? I think I found 4 out of 60 different products that gave me a decent snapshot, right? And when I talk about a snapshot, and just to kind of to briefly cover it, what I look for in experience, you look at major, minor cannabinoids, the major being the THC and the CBD, and then you look at all total sum of cannabinoids, total available cannabinoids. And if you look at the total cannabinoids and the difference between total cannabinoids and the total of THC and CBD, that is what a gentleman, I believe his name is John Nathan, calls the tax spread. total available cannabinoids. And the difference in that number is what really drives the patient experience, because that gets into the minor cannabinoids like the CBGs and the CBCs and the CBNs, and we can get into depth in that conversation, because we found with an epilepsy patient, CBG and then the terpene beta caryophyllene.
And you can also find that strain that has a very high total available cannabinoid with less psychoactive effect and longer lasting.
Yes, absolutely, depth of that experience. But not only, the tax spread, but also the terpenoid profile, which generally drives the cannabis experience. But it's the combination of those and the diversity in that is a big deal. And so that empowers a patient. And when you talk about, if I knew that information, if I knew that helped me as a patient, and I can walk in, I can see a product and knew, okay, that's what it contains. Those are all the same things that help me. I don't care what the strain name is, right? Because it's going to be different. And then that saves me time. It saves me cost. It saves me pain.
You're not having to play whack-a-mole with strains, trying to find the right one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And then when you do find that right one, what was it about it that helped me? And you hear on so many patients' journey that those strains are lost, right? I can't find it again. So, that's one of the big things and the voices that we want to make sure that we keep prevalent in these emerging markets, especially with people like yourself who are incredibly influential in formulating these, the laws that are going to govern and evolve this program, is to hear that voice.
Take it even one step further. They're like, Blue Dream has worked for me, and so from this supplier, and then they go to another market and they try Blue Dream, and it's a completely different experience. To have that comparison between the two, to know exactly why that's different. It's deeper than just the name of the strain.
Yeah, and a lot of cannabis growers for a long time got really creative with these names too. Right?
Yeah, it is hard to say, Mama, I know what's going to help you. It's the purple panty dropper,
or the lumpy space princess.
Yeah,
but getting access to the information, and it wasn't possible, in some, like you said, even in some older markets, you're not getting that information now. And so finally, something exciting, in that regard to kind of start to have
but I think even especially from an entrepreneur, right? Everything's about capital. But if there were 50 dispensaries in the state and there was one of them that could provide that patient experience, I would drive my ass there every single time. Right? So for someone who's looking for the riches and the niches, the entrepreneurial strategy to be different in an emerging market that's evolving fast, focus on that patient journey and stop trying to keep up with the recreational trends, because you're going to set yourself apart so differently from everything else that's out there. And patience, and I keep saying patience, but it's the consumer journey, right? I'm using this product because it helps me. It doesn't matter if it's from a recreational standpoint or from a medicinal standpoint, but the one that separates themselves and starts really doing the deep work on satisfying and providing that customer user experience is gonna win here. And now's the time, because the conversation is being had, and this is the conversation that's being had behind closed doors with lawmakers that we are in on a daily basis. In multiple states, and so these are the conversations that are going to set the laws. And so having this perspective and making sure this perspective is understood is pretty critical.
Really, what I think I wanted to talk about particularly was kind of more of a regional update.
Yeah.
But I think before I dive into that, while we're talking medical markets, which is obviously kind of the main focus of the organization here, I think Ohio is one that we're kind of seeing a lot of activity in right now. They did a license expansion. So, Ohio, similarly Louisiana, is regulated by the Board of Pharmacy. That's who regulates the retail there. Not many states do that. There's only a couple, and Ohio is one of them. So they recently did a lottery process to their Board of Pharmacy, issued new dispensary permits, and they also gave the cultivators the right to expand. The cultivators had canopy limits, right? And so now they've allowed them to grow more canopy, issued new pharmacy permits, and that program medically seems to be doing really well. They also use the prescription monitoring program. So there are some similarities between here and there.
Don't they have a tier system as far as size between?
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I think, a tier 1, tier 2, and they definitely gave them significant capacity increases there.
So what is Ohio's capacity? How many cultivators? How many dispensaries? What does their market look like from an evolution of a modern cannabis program? right? And
So I think they're sitting around 60 dispensaries, and
what's population? 10?
Yeah, I think just around there. Yeah.
so roughly double of our size.
10 million?
Yeah, but I'm Mike. I'd have to get you to fact check me on that. I know it's much larger than ours, but I don't know exactly the number. But so 60 dispensaries. And
11.6.
wow, even bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of those are just coming online recently. They've also seen prices start to come down there, which is really kind of a testament to the new market and the evolution of a new market, right?
Competition, would you say?
It's competition, but it's also just expansion, right?
Yeah.
Just giving, more cultivation capacity and then more dispensary licensing. And so it took them years to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
And their prices are still, higher than, say, Michigan's rec market. But
they're coming down simply because customers have a choice, right? So when you increase access, when you expand, there's always going to be efficiency in the program that allows to give them an advantage in a market, which if somebody is producing, selling at a high quality at a lower price, obviously that's where the patient and consumer is going to gravitate to. So the more access points they have, the more competition in grabbing that patient throughout their journey. And so I think that's a big driver of the access and expansion conversation. So Ohio, 11 million people in the state, and they have how many dispensaries?
I think it's right around 60.
60.
And many of those are new, just coming online.
Would the expansion of the cultivation in Ohio attribute to more competitive pricing for the cannabis versus for medical versus black market, or even recreational?
Well, I think in general, and I was kind of alluding to this earlier when I said there's a little bit more research on that. I guess really what I mean is data, and it's more consumer data, right? And what we observe is that consumers are willing to pay somewhere around maybe a 15, possibly 20% premium to shop legally. That's about the threshold, right? They're willing to do that, and both sides of that equation kind of end up adjusting back and forth with each other. But that's about what a consumer is willing to spend to go to a legal outlet. And so I think it's important for the producers and the retailers to know that and to kind of be aware of that whenever they're making this.
Yeah, I mean, how critical is that information? Knowing your customer is the fundamental aspect that drives a business. Knowing what your customer is willing to pay for a quality product is a key driver of a business. I mean, how important is that? That's
everything.
Yeah, it is everything.
So again, Ohio definitely seems to be, as far as medical programs, one that is, they did a major expansion, right? And so obviously it's been about a year, right? So they're still just starting to get the data off that, but it does seem to have been effective. Prices have come down around 20%. They put out a survey recently, and I think somewhere around 50% of the patients said that they were very pleased with the program. It was one of those like pleased, very pleased. And so I thought those were pretty good numbers, and so that was encouraging to see whenever you start thinking about the evolution of a medical program.
Well, in the medical program in Ohio is a good example, and I'm very, very curious about it because conservative state traditionally, and there is a lot of integration from the medical community. That's an open conversation. They have the Cleveland School of Cannabis there. We've had conversations with them. Dr. Humant Bid sits on our medical advisory board. He's one of the chief instructors, in the Ohio area about the medical efficacy of cannabis, especially in treating cancer. It's pretty incredible. But I know that conversation is definitely more fluid and doesn't face as many institutional barriers as it does here in Louisiana, and that's a key conversation in this cannabis conversation.
Then outside of there, kind of looking through the region, Florida, obviously the most active program. I think at the last year, I haven't seen the most recent numbers. They did over like 1.2 billion in sales in Florida. You got 22 companies licensed there, but I think around 17 are active. There's a few permits that are still just kind of sitting dormant. You're seeing some legacy California brands move into Florida, right? Jungle Boys and Cookies both just opened dispensaries there. So Jungle Boys has a store in Ocala, just opened one in Orlando. Cookies launched in Miami, and I think they're going to go to Orlando next too. And they are somewhat geographically limited, right? Like whenever Jungle Boys got that permit, their cultivation facility is in Ocala. And so I think they had to open their first dispensary within some geographic boundaries within like their region, you would call it. So that's a big evolution to see, companies moving, at that scale, right? Because I mean, Florida permits are big business, right? Let's not get it twisted, So seeing, legacy companies like that moving into a market like that that's still medical. Now there is an adult use ballot initiative in Florida, but it likely
When do you see that?
I don't even think they get to vote on it till 2024, right? So they're still gathering signatures and in that early phase.
So that's a great example of Florida being a. Would you say it's not even fully evolved, or would you say Florida is a fully evolved
No.
medical program?
Oh no, I'd say it's for a medical program, it's pretty sophisticated, right? I mean, you've got the vertical integration to me is somewhat. There's costs and benefits with it, right? I mean, when you go to store A, that the product should be pretty consistent, but then you're only seeing products from one supplier there.
Yeah,
so
right.
you do tend to drive around to a bunch of different stores to try a bunch of different stuff, which can be fun, but it takes a lot of time.
Well, and then patient perspective again. If you're someone whose life depends on it, and you're a resident of Florida, new to this journey, that costs a lot of money.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And so go back to that packaging, and I keep reverting back to that, but that's a critical importance to make sure they have access to the information, and it goes into even a state like Florida. Do you have to bounce around store to store? And I'm going to assume that they don't have the information you need on most of that packaging.
They are starting, so kind of like similar to where we are. They're actually probably a little bit ahead in putting out the terpene content and the minor cannabinoids and things like that. So that information is starting to flow through in the Florida
I think they
market.
have like a QR code system. You could take a snapshot on your phone.
They do, but even the QR codes, they give you
Top three.
Yeah, they give you THC, CBD, and then they give you top 2 or 3 if you're lucky. And then by the time you finish handling the package, it's some of them you rub it off. It's just so small. The QR code, even when you go to it, it gives you top 3. It's limited, and being able to see do deeper work. So again, this is coming from a patient perspective. We would ask if there's a possibility to provide more information to guide those patient journeys. I can be a one that to be a testament that is going to pay off for your business.
Yeah. Right. It's like the weatherman saying, it's just going to be hot or cold today.
Yeah.
Just figure the rest out. Maybe it'll rain. Maybe it's windy. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's time to really shift that conversation from ABC options, which is indica sativa hybrid, which that has absolutely no influence of what drives that consumer experience. It has to do with the things we just talked about, right? The major minor cannabinoids and the terpene profiles, and then the full plant experience, vice some of your isolates, distillates, things like that. There are clear experience differences, routes of administration that goes in for it. So this is the big role, and the reason we're here is to make sure we can guide that patient experience. And I can tell you the market will shift if you can start providing that and focus on that patient's journey. That patient's journey is the consumer. It's the same thing as your consumer journey, because experience is experience, right? In a way that affects people. And if I can spend the money that I have knowing that I can achieve the desired effect that I want, that's where my money's going all day long. So that's a clear point I just want to continue to drive home. Let's go back to Ohio a little bit. When does Ohio become a Florida, right? If there's 40, 60 dispensaries, 40 dispensaries, 60 dispensaries, what is Florida's population?
I think it's around 18 to 20 million.
18 to 20. And how many patients? Did you say they're at more than 5% of their?
No, they're at just over 3, like 3.
Oh, wow.
3.3, something like that.
Right, so that puts it, where's that number patient-wise? What was the population?
21 million.
21.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
Yeah, I've got all this in charts, but just
in
front of me. So, yeah, I mean, it's 400,000 patients, maybe somewhere around there.
I
so
thought that number was higher in Florida, with 400,000 patients. So what happens when it goes recreational? What do those patient numbers do?
Well, at that point, it's, how many of them decide to continue paying the fee, and it really depends on what that transition looks like, right? If their medical dispensary just switches over to an adult use dispensary, right, and there's no other real change outside of that, then a lot of people probably don't renew, and they just go, unless there's a big tax difference. Now, Florida's medical is also not taxed, so what's that adult use tax rate? right?
what not the patient use, right? There's going to be flux on whether it's medical or recreational. What do the numbers do, right?
Oh, I mean, so I mean,
Consumer
the
numbers.
most recent polling from Gallup shows around 16% of the population uses this. So you go
Whoa.
from
Wow,
3%,
you're almost five, six times growth.
you go from 3% to potentially that. Now, to your point earlier, speaking about the legacy market and kind of the interplay between those two, you can't expect that it's like a switch gets flipped and all
No.
those people, that takes years, right? That's just
Right,
generational
right.
change that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so usually first year in an adult use market, you'll see maybe 35% of consumers go completely legal, right? And that number climbs up and up every year if the market performs.
Yeah.
Right, if the market performs. If it doesn't, which I guess a good example of this was, it's crazy to say because of how much production's there, but California's legal sales are going down and the illicit market sales are going up. I mean,
Yeah.
that data's out there,
Yes.
right? I don't think Florida will follow that path. I really don't. I think that they're going to make the progress, if the adult use should pass.
That is always a threat if you don't correct the market, right?
Right.
And that's just a great point to continue to drive home. You have an opportunity here to produce a very viable market from an economic standpoint, to serve patient needs, to produce more jobs for many, many reasons, that this is should be a positive experience in every state. They need to take advantage of this opportunity because the consumers and the access to the quality and the oversupply that we're seeing and the knowledge base that's driving the huge supply and the demand and the shift right now, where you have almost 80% of the U.S. population in favor of legalizing cannabis, right? In some capacity. This is not a stigmatized, well, not a, this is a conversation that everybody is involved in. So, yeah, I get off my rant there, but let's talk Ohio with a significant population. What is the next step for them? When do you see somebody like Ohio going recreational?
I think they're in the same boat as Florida, where they're gathering signatures. Like, they're not going to vote this year, but fully in the next cycle, the next 2 years, they will. As far as southern states, Arkansas and Missouri are both scheduled to vote in November. And
How do you
so
think those will go?
the polling in Arkansas suggests that it should. I think it was around 58% the last time I saw. Now it's been a bit of a roller coaster. They had to go through the Supreme Court to get it verified, right? So there was some doubt as to whether or not the bill would actually go up for a vote in November. But in the past 10 days or so, it's come out of the courts, and it will. I have seen kind of some high-profile names, the governor, other folks saying they're going to vote against it, kind of trying to rally that. But the polling data says it's going to pass, and it's just clearly it's not a ballot initiative where it has to get 50%, right?
Yeah.
50% plus one vote and they win. So the data suggests that it's going to pass, and the same in Missouri, where it looks promising there as well.
What's the biggest obstacle for both of those states?
I mean, look, just like the pro legalization movement exists, I think in the past couple of years it's become very clear that the opposition groups are becoming more well organized, and they're out there too. We talked about law enforcement earlier. I think their biggest hesitation would likely disappear if we had reliable roadside testing, like a way to test impairment roadside. I think that law enforcement would get a lot more comfortable a lot quicker. You're seeing just some conservative, typically affiliated with religious groups out there, and people are entitled to their opinions, right? And so that's why you do really enjoy a state whenever the ballot initiative process is an option, because
Sure.
I think why that is critically important with a ballot initiative, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's really empowering the population to get involved in that decision. Am I correct? Right?
100%.
So what you're seeing there is the anecdotal response to the medical efficacy or the consumer experience to cannabis, who are driving those decisions, right?
That's right.
And one of the things that is a constant conversation that comes up again with the Baton Rouge, the fire department, is how do you define impairment? Because you sit with any doctor who has studied cannabis, the density in your receptors change over time. So measuring impairment with youth, right, as tolerance grows, is is critical in what we're seeing in the anecdotal response. So for somebody like myself who uses it, microdoses it on a daily basis to be functional in the things that I do, at some point that was operating heavy equipment. It was operating saws, but I knew as a performance enhancer, it would allowed me to be clear and in the present and not be distracted. So it was used as a medicine in those situations, and so again, I keep going back to that patient perspective, but the impairment, how to test for impairment, we're still testing the outdated HR policies that are preventing people from achieving better health outcomes and forcing them to utilize the pharmaceuticals, right? They're forced to use the pharmaceuticals. That's criminal. So impairment, how is it tested? Is when you talk about opposition groups, do you see this as being a significant conversation in the cannabis conversation in every state? And what are the impairment conversations that you're hearing?
Well, up until this point, right? Impairment is not necessarily like they look at a nanogram level in your blood.
That's
right.
right.
Like that's really the only testing that exists today.
They're testing for metabolites, right?
Right. And so, again, impairment for you versus someone else may not be the same, and that is what makes this such a complicated matter.
But what if I'm a patient and let's just say I'm a firefighter, and I don't want to take the Ambien, I don't want to take the Tylenol PM, I don't want to take have to drink, or I can effectively use cannabis to go to bed at night that allows me to perform during the day. What if that metabolite is still in my system if they test me?
I think you know the answer to that.
Yeah, there it is. So
we're getting a little sick of the rhetorical questions.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Tell 'em.
But I'm just thinking about those who might be watching this, because these are the arguments and the conversations that we're having even today with the men and the women who are controlling the laws that govern our access points. And so that's a critical point that I'll keep driving home, and I'm sorry for that. But
no, but on top of that, though, there's so many patients that rely on microdosing that's beyond just getting high. Like they need
so some of the other things
that consistent
that have been,
regimen.
at least some of the more cutting edge things that I've heard about, and actually you were one of the people that put this company on my radar, the Hound Labs.
Yeah.
So they were in the news recently with their breathalyzer technology that doesn't test necessarily for impairment, but for recent use, right? Like how that's at least as I understand it. All I know is
it's so funny you bring that up, and just kind of put this in perspective. Is during COVID they were looking for emergency testing procedures. I saw the intersection of cannabis myself, Dr. Smith, and we reached out and started collaborating with Hound Labs to bring that testing modality, right? I had a friend that was in the agency. That's what they detected and found bomb makers through the same breath analysis. He validated all the technology. They gave me the access to it.
So they did sign a deal with Quest Diagnostics recently, which is obviously a very large company. Quest is,
there was a significant conversation there, and their team was very, very, very curious. And Dr. Smith went on a rant about you can't test for impairment, right? You can't test through that method for impairment. The impairment changes for each individual, and that's the basis of the conversation. So I'm very curious, because it's the same thing that's affecting Baton Rouge. We've talked to Pennsylvania, New York, we've talked to Arizona, and we just recently had a conversation with Texas about these conversations. And this is critical driver for decision makers, for patients, for those who are looking for access or just looking for information in general. So it's just
that breathalyzer technology is out there, and again, I know in the past 2 weeks they signed some sort of big deal with Quest. I don't know where it's going yet. I think it's still in the testing phase, so that's one option. Another thing I heard about in the past couple of months was some sort of kind of potential brain scanning to tell impairment, which kind of goes in line with what you said earlier about we're looking at metabolites, or we're looking at breath, which can tell, at least with Hound's technology, I think can tell, proximity to consumption when it happened. But the brain scan may be, the answer, because you're saying that the receptors change, and maybe they're stimulated to this degree but not this degree, and maybe that's where you can tell a microdose from truly being impairment. We don't have that data yet. We don't have the benchmarks.
You'd probably need a baseline to compare it to.
I think it is remiss, though, to to write it off as a non-concern. It's like, oh no, you can never overconsume and it's fine, like
No,
because,
absolutely, it's never a
because,
non-concern.
it does. If we're all going to agree on a policy, then I think that that's going to be a critical part of the conversation, and it's where law enforcement, I think, if they had the answer, I think that you would see that because look, from their perspective, I think like your average department doesn't want to enforce this anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so
Right.
it's the top layer that's kind of.
Here's a question from the peanut gallery. Can they use that same test to test for opioid levels?
Which one?
The breathalyzer, or do they have a test to test for Vicodin?
No, and that's kind of the whole point is that they don't, right?
Why
and
not?
So, well, because you're taking it's like you said, they're taking it every day anyway. It's clearly going to be in their system. So what do they use in those situations?
But it's a pharmaceutical that's covered by
it's a Schedule
insurance
II, right?
and governed legally by
And
law.
So how does that work? Is it's just literally the smell test? Or like, oh yeah, guy fell asleep at his desk. Like they're not worried about your blood level. They're worried about your performance.
You fall asleep at your desk if you're lucky. What if it's going through a red light, right?
Right.
Which, it's happened.
Yeah, clearly.
But and that's a conversation. So for those who are listening, right, we get into the impairment test. This is not like alcohol, right? It is not even in the realm of that conversation. You know how you test for impairment? Small unit leadership at organizations. That's
Right.
how you write your HR policies. And I guarantee you the efficiency and the productivity and the bottom line of your company will continue to grow if you change your policies to get up to date
And look,
with your employee
companies
needs.
are doing it, man. Like,
No, they are.
Even, like, I can't remember if it was CVS or Walgreens, but one of the big chain pharmacies recently changed their policy, even for the pharmacists.
Well, in Pennsylvania, what we found was the firefighters and the municipalities are not even they have dropped their testing policies because they can't meet employee requirements and quotas.
And I think that's a good point when we talk about the patient protections, right? And I guess it depends on where you stand politically, but like, to me, the business community have the opportunity right now to by far and away be the leaders on this.
Boom.
Like, in Louisiana, right?
Everywhere.
We've already given pretty good protections to state employees. We still have to figure out law enforcement, firefighters, which is a little more sensitive, but state employees have protections for the most part right now. So if you're a private company, there's nothing stopping you from
protecting your employees.
Protecting your employees.
That's right. And that's how you empower the nation.
And wait for the government to come and tell you what to do.
And that's the backbone of this country anyway, is a small business. If you want to change an outcome, focus on your own community. Start looking at those small businesses within.
So I guess is a good point. Bridgewest Consulting, we do not test for marijuana.
Oh man,
Get high retention rate.
We can't talk about states unless we talk about Goliath, right? What's going on in Texas?
Well, it's 2022, so they didn't have a legislative session, right? So Texas legislature only meets every other year, which really makes things difficult, right? 'Cause, even here, like, we don't have a ballot initiative. Texas doesn't have one either, so you got to go through the legislature. And if you only have every other year as an opportunity to bring this up, you lose the momentum during that off year.
Have you been excuse me, have you been involved in the conversations in Texas?
I really haven't, no, man. I tell you, as far as the lawmaking process goes, I'm really involved here, and I've softly worked in some other states, but as far as that part of my career, that's really focused on here. In other states, we're working on the consulting, the licensing, and things like that. And so, no, I've never been to the state capitol in Austin. I've driven by it. Looks like a nice building. But as far as Texas goes, they only meet every other year. So this year is an off year. So next year, 2023, would be their next chance to do something, right? And historically, they passed medical not long after we did. But again, that kind of ties into my comment from earlier. I really do think we set off, a wave here of at least states considering it, and then what they did was basically a glorified hemp program, right? They've got strict THC caps, they've got strict product form caps, as far as different, no flower, there's, no vapes. It took the suppliers a few years to even figure out a workaround to make an edible that was worth using. And I think now they've managed to get like a 10 milligram edible on the market.
How many suppliers do they have in Texas?
5. And similar to, as I kind of talked about in Florida, where there's 22 permits, but only about 17 companies really operating at a large capacity. In Texas, there are a handful that, they seem more like flags in the ground than than true operators.
Yeah.
you
So
know.
what's the retail space look like?
The company I'm most familiar with would be Texas Compassionate Cultivation. I know they're doing, they have so many crazy rules they have to follow. So they are trying, right? They can't, they can have a dispensary in the same town as their production facility. Then outside of that, it's almost like these kiosk model, right?
Wow.
Like not machine kiosk, but like they can't leave the inventory there overnight.
So you talk about I get my weed through Netflix.
No, Redbox. That was the
Redbox.
Redbox.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
When I say
I'm old
kiosk,
school.
So you got to
I
go to the
mean-
Rouses to get
It's a
that.
kiosk. I mean more of a, like it's not a machine, right? It's like a kiosk store.
Those son of
Are we
bitches
talking
gonna
like a claw machine? You
Those
go
son
pick
of a
up your
bitches.
bud.
You
But
think-
they can't keep the inventory there overnight, so they got people driving it in every day.
Yeah.
They see patients, then they got to go bring it back to
Yeah.
the production facility at night. You know what I mean? And so it's
I want to circle back to the claw machine. I think
Yeah,
we need to,
you ever seen a
Cannabis
ATM
club.
ripped out the front of a store? Yeah, you keep that shit there long enough,
incredibly
son.
difficult
You
state.
catch my truck on camera.
Incredibly difficult state to
Yeah.
operate in. Small number of operators, regulation heavy in every which way, and these companies are trying, but truthfully, it probably does make more financial sense to hang on to your permit and wait till it's a real market. Which is what some of these companies are doing. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying the finances should drive everything, but it is something that always has to be considered.
Well, finances have to, right? Because if you're going to be a company that sustains or any longevity to it, there has to be some type of profitability. You just can't keep throwing money down the drain,
Yeah.
right? We saw that happen in Louisiana, started putting a lot of strain on a lot of people. And we see that in some of those earlier emerging markets. But Texas,
now,
what do you...
when it happens, right? I mean, it's by far and away from a business standpoint the largest opportunity that's left on the table, right? You got such
Yeah.
a small number of operators there. They're not really
26 million?
26 million people
Boom.
roughly, probably grown since I last looked at it, because I think they had a lot of growth during the pandemic and after. So,
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
Well, yeah, a lot of big corporations relocating there, right? Bringing a lot of people with them.
And then they've also done
28.6.
all the major cities have done some sort of decrim, right, in some form
Yeah.
or fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really it's an unfortunate situation that they only meet every other year, because I feel like they would have made a lot of progress, because they've got some great groups working there, some really smart people, and I can't speak as fluently to it because I haven't been involved in it, but from a investment standpoint, whenever Texas becomes an opportunity, like I said, it's by far the
Yeah.
biggest one that's left.
And
But
and it's-
I expect it to be, I guess it depends on when it happens and how it happens. If they make a move before federal, right, or if they wait till federal. I mean, at this point, I don't even know what the right answer is.
Man, I tell you, it's weird that cannabis is dragging so much in Texas. Simply because you have an area like Austin is quickly becoming like the psychedelic capital of the nation, right? That is going to start allowing, from an access point, there's a lot of roads to that flow through the Austin, the Texas area, and that's it's amazing that they're dragging their feet. I think Texas has an incredible opportunity to take the lead here, and if they could take the lead in a that patient focused approach with the the patriotic and embracing stance of Texas. And I had that conversation today. When people go to Texas, they feel good.
Yeah.
In Texas, right? And I just had the same experience in Austin not too long ago. It just feels good to be in Texas. The interactions with people, the freedom and the presence, and there's a lot of things about it that's is incredibly attractive. Obviously, there's economic incentives on many levels. Cannabis needs to be an integral kind of conversation, and I think for someone in some state that is so veteran focused and veteran friendly, right? I think they need to open themselves up to start listening to those voices and understand why access is critically important.
Yeah.
And so if we can help our neighbors, Texas, get online, or I've been involved in the emergency disaster response and mobilizing forces to help after storms, right? With the mental health crisis in this country, it's time to give Texas residents, 28.6 million people, legal access to a natural plant medicine that they can effectively manage their stress response.
That's right.
and achieve better health outcomes, right? And this absolutely should be a conversation in everybody's wellness journey in Texas. And I would ask that everyone start and get involved in that conversation and start putting pressure to start opening those access points in quality and variety. And Texas take the lead, man, because of the nation is waiting on you. And with that said, we know with the way forward, Mr. Prevot, and this is one of the first times I've heard it. It was a conversation between you and I. Is brands, teams, interstate commerce. Talk to me about what that means to you.
Well, so I think it was a conversation point that came up, which is what will survive interstate commerce, right? Like what are the,
Break that down for folks who don't know what that means.
So,
Why are those three things significant?
So as we've kind of alluded to with the federal policy, all marijuana that is legally produced in any given state, such as Louisiana, Florida, etc., has to be cultivated, sold in that state. You've heard us talk a bit about overproduction and how maybe there's a mismatch between what's being produced in the West and can be sold in the West, and then that same mismatch is kind of flip-flopped on the East Coast. And so, interstate commerce is the concept that, as soon as marijuana or at some point after marijuana is legalized, the question has been posed, will it be able to be shipped across state lines at that point? The general answer is that yes, it should be, unless whatever federal policy is put into place is restrictive in some nature on that. And then, states will also have the ability to maybe look at import taxes and things like that. So it's a concept that's been out there for a long time, and it's widely accepted that federal legalization will have some component of interstate commerce, but it may take a few years for it to be like true free market.
How's that change the market, right? Just at a very basic
Well, it depends on when it happens, right? Is the thing, right? Like if
well, let's say what happens if we can start shipping this and selling across borders, where I can walk into a retail outlet in Louisiana and buy product that was cultivated and shipped from California or from another country. How does that affect the dynamics and the mechanics of the market that we are currently existing in today?
No, I think it's certainly the most free market approach, right?
It changes. Do you think dominant suppliers?
Potentially. It depends on, again, how much capacity gets built in these new markets that are coming online today, right? And how many businesses on the West Coast go out of business in the meantime,
right,
before this happens, right?
Yeah.
So that balance of power, it could shift. Right?
Yeah.
We don't know, right? Like, so I mean, that's literally kind of the game today, is that the folks that have been operating on the West Coast the longest, many of them are having a lot of financial troubles, right? And at the same time, you're getting new mega grows built all around the country.
Yeah.
So
But
the balance and what it looks like depends on the timing, right? If it happens tomorrow, then I think there's still a thriving export market for the West Coast in the Colorado and some of those regions that have been producing longer. It's a big opportunity for them to kind of come in and push the state players potentially aside, not all the way, but to gain significant market share. Now, if it happens 5 years from now, it might be a different story.
Yeah, because everything moves incredibly fast and
Right.
it's changing in the cannabis industry. And so, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, in the California, market, how it's been so mature for so long, you lose a lot of experience if that transition period, is delayed. And these companies that have been putting out quality products that you and I both have experienced that are pretty fantastic. So it'd be a shame to lose that experience.
Well, and it's the sun grown versus the outdoor, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I do. We've talked about genetics a lot in our in our one-on-one conversations, and I've talked about outdoor cultivation potential in different regions of the country.
Yeah.
I mean, I do firmly believe that there's a strain or a category of cannabis that will grow outdoors in any climate, but that could be a long journey in figuring that out. Right?
It is, but I'm telling you, it will be figured out. It will be figured out,
I mean,
and
will
there's
be,
nothing
but-
greater than the power of the sun. Right?
Exactly, and I think that the motivation will be there and it will happen. But a lot of the best sun grown is widely known right now. The best sun grown in the probably the world right
Peru?
now. No, it's gonna be Northern California,
The
Southern
Yeah.
Oregon,
Humboldt.
Yeah.
the Triangle region,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, they've been it's been a generational legacy handed down farms, and genetics that were brought to this country in the early 70s. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, and that sun grown, most of it, most is a strong word, because look, the quality, right? So much is being produced, that brand is being tarnished,
Yeah.
right? Like sun grown is almost under attack,
Yeah.
by, probably the MSOs, if you want to be
Indoors,
frank about
right?
it,
Indoors.
right?
But
And,
that brings, you can't ignore the when the growing demand, the growing presence of the cannabis industry comes energy consumption, right? And so when you talk, that is a turning to a very significant. I mean, you're talking about.
And again, that's what concerns me is that we,
Yes.
this
That's why
this
sun grown
this
will happen.
the sun-grown production that's already in line, that's already been performing very well, producing very clean product for generations, right, is now in a pinch, and is getting quickly replaced by large warehouses that consume tons of power and produce a product that maybe looks better, but has a more narrow cannabinoid profile, cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars more to produce,
Yeah.
and everything else that goes along with that.
Yeah.
And so that's where I see this mismatch. But ultimately, I think
But here is why.
it's also part of the progression, right? Decentralizing the production and spreading it out. Like, even though as painful as it may be to watch, that happen, it's kind of almost, it was very predictable. It was very predictable, and it's also not, from an economic standpoint, when you just think through the theory of it, it makes total sense, and that that regional production needs to emerge, and the sun grown in the South and other regions has to be developed, and it's not there yet.
What are the challenges in the South for sun grown?
I mean, the climate, obviously,
Sure.
right? I mean, the mold,
Humidity.
humidity, biggest challenge. And again, I do believe there are genetics that would thrive here, but they're probably likely, stored in, other countries right now, and the R&D needs to happen, and et cetera. And
But I think a critical phase that's going to be the the intermediary is going to be the sun-driven solar. That needs to be a very real conversation, right? Because they're already putting restrictions on energy capacity. And if you look at Louisiana, we had some very significant growth in some companies here that needed energy at a capacity that Louisiana could not have provided. So they went to Texas. And so for that reason, Texas could become a significant player in this game alone because of the way they control and monopolize their energy and the separation and the distribution of that. And there's a lot of space, right? There's a ton of space, and they're also in a great position of economic output, export, import, right there. It just puts them in a great position. Population, right? They're a powerhouse. So, Texas, come online.
Yeah.
So Peter, I want to give you, the last words here. I can tell you that it has been an incredible journey with you, starting from the time you came into my home and asked me to testify in front of Congress, and there's a story to share with that, but and what you have contributed and what I've seen you do personally here in Louisiana. I've been able to come in and assist you in the process and others along in that process, and that has been an incredible learning journey for me. And you have essentially been the gateway into the cannabis industry for me. It's been a struggle and a healing path, but you've been a critical piece in that, and I just wanted to thank you for that. Last words go to you, buddy.
No, man, look, I can't thank you enough for the time and, the flattering words. And, let's not get it wrong, man. Like, when I came, knocking on the door, I was looking for you. I didn't know it was you specifically, but I knew that we needed, the veteran community in particular, needed a voice at the Capitol, and I wanted you to be a part of that. And you came in, and, not only have I had the opportunity to kind of watch you progress, as both an individual and then professionally as a result of that, but then, you also helped, usher in kind of a new era here, right? And helped with getting vaporization approved, which, was the gateway to getting flower approved. And, you and I, even though like on some of the points, we maybe have different opinions here and there, but ultimately have always had the same goal, right? Which is like, let's push this thing forward. Let's try and really focus on the medical efficacy, and share by, part of doing that is sharing our own stories and our own insights with other people.
Yes.
And, just kind of helping break down the barriers and letting people realize that, like, this is an option, and if you want to explore it, helping them figure out how to do that, And so, I mean, I just got to, thank you guys for all the work y'all have done here. And, I think we all look back on this phase, I mean, we're all just grease on the wheels, man. These wheels have been in motion.
That's right.
For a long time, and of course, like the industry is in an interesting spot right now. Right?
Yeah.
We just sat here and pointed out all sorts of inconsistencies and things that could be done better. But, think about where it's come even since you and I met,
Yes.
right? And so
Yeah.
in the next 24 months, we'll come back and, we'll probably have this conversation multiple times. And every time there'll be, some new layer to
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and it's the work's never done.
It's
Right.
not. And that's, critical piece, man. And make sure you take some time to enjoy it, because I know how much you put into it, right?
Yeah.
Take some time to enjoy it, because, looking at yourself in the mirror every day, you don't see what you have actually brought to the table and the things that have changed in your own life. So take some time to reflect on that, because I know you and your wife have been some of the most amazing people in the cannabis industry. She's in a craft and shares a perspective just like you, very devoted to the cannabis industry. And you guys are changing people's lives by putting yourself at the friction points and utilizing your gift to change the laws and provide access. So for that, you and I's cause will always be united, and I want to appreciate that, man. So last words, buddy, and then we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, look, and again, it's been such an interesting process getting to this point, and I don't know what the future holds. Even sometimes, I've been involved in the different aspects of the industry. I always make the analogy of surfing. You know what I mean? Like being in this business is kind of like surfing. I get out and I'm enjoying it. I love what I'm doing, but got to figure out what's the next move, what's the next wave, so to speak. And I tend to have always kind of found a place for myself and try to stay relevant, but catch a wave and inevitably I end up paddling back out, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but that's almost in some ways a sign of progress, right? Because
Yeah.
that means that enough things have changed to where there are now new needs, right? And just trying to figure out how to stay involved with all this stuff. And I just often regularly just thankful to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And every time you ride one of those waves, you get better when the next one comes. So
That's the plan.
yeah, thank you again, buddy, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.